I've decided that in life you're either straight or you've met Jameela Jamil. So I am quite refreshed now that I've engaged in Jameela's content again, just because of the fact that she's come out speaking out in defense of Justin Baldoni. And what I love so much is that one, she's she's almost unfiltered, right? But then revisiting her bio, I'm like, I don't think I ever paid attention to this before, but her bio literally says advocate first. And that just fills my heart with so much joy. But what it also kind of underlines for me and highlights is that I think the first step in the wrong direction for Justin Baldoni in the telling of this type of a story is that he sought out an author who was not a woman of color. And I think from there cascades all of the other issues that we've now walked into, because the further he walked into that world, the more he walked away from people who speak the language of social justice, and the more he walked away from people who not only speak the language of social justice, but have lived experiences that we understand the plight of intergenerational trauma. We understand the layers of context that plays out behind a story like what's being told in It Ends With Us. And I think that because this cast was so full of people, because my biggest gripe with white feminism is that white feminism is convinced that the sole issue and the sole villain that exists in this world is patriarchy and misogyny. And it paves over any other issues. When people claim to not see color and claim that their goodness is propped up on the idea that they don't treat or don't hate people of color and they will allow them to exist in their sphere, people of color end up becoming tokenized. And I think that's my biggest disappointment with this whole thing, because the idea that is the docuseries around the Eras Tour a form of damage control. And in that way, it makes me revisit, because you notice it, you see it, but then you often don't want it to be true. So when they're telling the stories of Cam, when they're telling the stories of Wiley, in my opinion, it feels exploitative. And it gives me the ick. Because we don't want people to be doing that in the industry. We want equity. We want all of these things to be there in place for us for the right reasons, and not for optics, not for performance, not for the performance of progressiveness. We want these things to happen and exist because people believe in the social justice, people believe in representation, people believe in the reason why representation matters. And one of the things that this brings up for me also is A Nice Indian Boy, which Wayfarer produced, is so beautifully done and it is so brilliantly told. But the reason why that is because not only was the story performed by people from the community, but everybody who was working behind the scenes, who were making contributions and steering the direction and steering the telling of the story, were people from the community that the story is being told from. And so it is so brilliantly told and powerfully told, because instead of things being watered down, instead of things not being true and accurate from within the community, they were like, because that's what happens with a lot of like Disney stories and a lot of other Hollywood representations of stories of people of color and from marginalized communities, is that there are misrepresentations of different cultures, different ethnicities, etc. And so in that way, when these mythical elements of culture, end up being represented in a story, it takes away from the truth. It takes away from the intent, the meaning, and the power of our culture and our traditions. But when you have the representation both in front of the camera and behind the camera in the telling of the story, that's where all of the magic happens. And I think that if this story had been told from people of color who understand intersectionality, and not only understand intersectionality, but have the lived experience of knowing what intergenerational trauma looks like, talks like, acts like, sounds like, and lives like, I think that the story of It Ends With Us could have had a dramatically different impact. And it's really sad to think that because the people involved in this cast don't speak the language of social justice and don't speak the language of the lived experience of people of color, of women of color, that they had no understanding outside of patriarchy and misogyny and couldn't bring anything else to the table to understand the plight of Lily. That it just breaks my heart. But Jameela Jamil brings all of that brilliance back. That, my God, if Justin Baldoni and Wayfair had been able to pursue a cast of women who have the lived experience of intergenerational trauma and the lived experience of social justice, holy, my God, do you understand how incredibly powerful that story could have been? Like, I don't know if we would have been able to emotionally survive. But Jameela Jamil, thank you for speaking up, because you have reminded me of the element that is missing in all of this.